A white police officer arrests an innocent black woman, but the intervention of a random passerby could change her fate forever. How will this confrontation end? Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment about what you think. Anna felt the chill of the late evening air as she walked down the quiet street, her footsteps echoing off the buildings around her. It had been a long, exhausting day at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. The shifts seemed to stretch longer lately, and tonight was no different. She was drained, both physically and mentally, but the crisp air gave her some relief. She decided to take a longer route home, hoping the walk would help her unwind from the stress of the day. The streets were nearly deserted, with only the occasional car driving by, and for a moment, Anna found comfort in the silence. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires pierced the stillness, followed by a loud, sickening thud. Anna's heart skipped a beat, and her instincts as a nurse kicked in immediately. She hurried towards the intersection from where the noise had come. As she approached, she saw a car speeding away, its taillights vanishing into the darkness. On the ground lay an elderly man, motionless, his body sprawled on the pavement. Anna's breath caught in her throat, but she quickly pushed her fear aside and ran to him. She knelt beside the man, her hands trembling as she checked his pulse. He was still alive, but barely. His breathing was shallow, and she could see that he had suffered a severe head injury. Anna knew that every second counted. She carefully adjusted his position to keep his airway clear and spoke to him softly, reassuring him even though she wasn't sure if he could hear her. She glanced around, hoping someone else might come to help, but the street was empty. Anna pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. She explained the situation to the dispatcher, giving the address and detailing the man's condition. She stayed on the line, her other hand gently resting on the man's shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. Moments later, she heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. 2 police cars arrived at the scene, lights flashing, and officers quickly stepped out, assessing the situation. Anna stood up, her hands raised slightly to show she meant no harm. She tried to explain that she was just passing by and had stopped to help the injured man, but the officers barely listened. They exchanged glances, their expressions hardening as they looked at her. Anna felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern face, approached her. "Were you the one driving the car?" he asked, his tone accusatory. Anna's eyes widened in shock. No, I was just walking home. I heard the crash and came to help," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She could see the skepticism in his eyes as he studied her. The other officer was already speaking with a small group of bystanders who had gathered at the edge of the scene. Anna hoped they would back up her story, but her heart sank as she saw their expressions, suspicious, distrustful. The tall officer frowned. "We got a report that a woman matching your description was seen driving away from the scene," he said. Anna's mouth went dry. She shook her head, trying to stay calm. "That's not true. I didn't drive any car. I was just walking by," she insisted, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officer gestured for her to step aside, and Anna felt panic rising in her chest. She watched as the other officer spoke with the bystanders, who were nodding, their faces grim. One of them, a middle-aged man, pointed towards Anna, and she felt her stomach drop. "She was there. I saw her near the car," the man said loudly, his voice carrying across the scene. Anna's heart pounded, and she felt her knees weaken. This was all wrong. She hadn't done anything, but It felt like the walls were closing in on her and no one was listening. The officers conferred for a moment before the tall one turned back to her. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we're going to have to take you in for questioning," he said, his voice devoid of empathy. Anna's eyes filled with tears and she shook her head. "Please, you have to believe me. I was only trying to help," she pleaded, but the officer had already pulled out a pair of handcuffs. He took a step towards her, and Anna felt a surge of fear. She looked around desperately, hoping someone, anyone, would speak up for her, but all she saw were cold, indifferent faces. The bystanders avoided her gaze, and the officers were unmoved. The cold metal of the handcuffs closed around her wrists, and Anna felt her breath hitch. She was being treated like a criminal, and no one seemed to care about the truth. The officer led her towards the patrol car, and she stumbled slightly, her mind racing. How had things gone so wrong? She had only wanted to help, and now she was being arrested for something she hadn't done. As they put her in the back of the patrol car, Anna could see the injured man being loaded into an ambulance. She hoped he would survive, but her own future seemed bleak. The doors closed, and she was plunged into darkness, the sound of the siren blaring as the car began to move. Tears streamed down her face, and she struggled to catch her breath. The weight of the injustice pressed down on her, and she felt utterly powerless. The drive to the police station seemed to stretch on forever. Anna's thoughts raced, her mind replaying the events over and over, trying to find some way to make sense of it all. She knew she was innocent, but it felt like no one else cared. The officers hadn't even bothered to listen to her side of the story. They had seen her, young, black, alone, and decided she was guilty. The realization cut deep, filling her with a mix of fear and anger. When they arrived at the station, Anna was led inside, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The bright lights and sterile walls made the place feel cold and unwelcoming. The officers escorted her to a small interrogation room and left her there, the door closing with a heavy thud. She sat down on the metal chair, her wrists aching from the cuffs, and took a shaky breath. She had to stay strong, she told herself. She couldn't give up now. Minutes turned into hours as Anna waited, alone in the room. She could hear the muffled voices of the officers outside, the occasional laughter, the clinking of keys. Time seemed to blur, and the exhaustion from her long day at work weighed heavily on her. She rested her head on the table, her eyes closing for a moment, but the fear kept her from truly resting. Every sound made her flinch, her nerves on edge. Eventually, the door opened, and a new officer entered, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She sat across from Anna, her gaze piercing. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said, her tone more neutral than the others. Anna lifted her head, her eyes red from crying. "I was just walking home," Anna began, her voice barely above a whisper. She recounted everything, how she heard the crash, how she ran to help, how she called 911. The officer listened, her expression unreadable, and Anna couldn't tell if she believed her or not. When she finished, there was a long silence, and the officer finally nodded. "We'll look into it," she said, standing up abruptly. Anna watched as she left the room, the door closing behind her once more. The promise to look into it felt hollow, but it was the only hope she had. Anna took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to believe that somehow the truth would come out. But as the hours dragged on, and the uncertainty gnawed at her, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that she was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. The atmosphere in the police station was heavy, filled with tension and fatigue. Anna had lost track of time, It could have been hours, or maybe even days, since she was brought in. The sterile walls of the interrogation room closed in on her, and she felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on her chest. She tried to stay focused, to keep believing that there had to be a way out of this nightmare. But every passing moment made her fear that she would be forgotten in this place, her story buried under the prejudices of those who had already judged her. Suddenly, the door to the small room creaked open, and a new figure stepped inside. He was a man in his late 40s, wearing an old, well-worn leather jacket. His eyes were sharp, yet kind as they assessed her. He looked out of place in the station like he wasn't supposed to be there, and that gave Anna a small glimmer of hope. He stepped towards her, his demeanor calm and confident. "Anna, right?" he said, his voice low but steady. "My name is Michael. I used to be a lawyer. I heard about your situation, and I think I can help." Anna blinked in surprise, her eyes widening. She hadn't expected anyone to come for her, especially not a lawyer. She could barely find her voice as she looked at him, trying to understand if this was real or just another trick to get her to confess to something she hadn't done. I don't understand," she whispered. "Why would you want to help me?" Michael pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, leaning slightly forward. "Because what's happening to you is wrong," he said simply, "and I'm not the kind of person who can just walk away when I see something like this." He paused, then added, "I've seen too many people get swallowed by this system because no one was willing to stand up for them. I don't practice law anymore, but that doesn't mean I forgot how to fight for what's right." Anna felt her eyes welling with tears again, but this time it wasn't just from fear. There was something about Michael, something in his eyes that made her want to believe him. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling as she spoke. "They think I did it. They won't listen to me. They just see what they want to see." Michael nodded, his expression softening. "I know, but we're going to change that. I need you to trust me, Anna. I'm going to do everything I can to prove your innocence, but it's going to take time. We need to start by finding evidence. Anything that can show that you weren't driving that car." Anna swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had been so overwhelmed by the accusations that she hadn't even thought about what could prove her innocence. She had no alibi, no witnesses, nothing but her own word, and that hadn't been enough for the police. But Michael seemed so sure, so determined, that she felt a flicker of hope ignite within her once more. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael gave her a reassuring smile. "First, I'm going to get you out of here. Might take a while, but I'm going to make sure they don't keep you locked up without cause. Then we'll start gathering evidence. There are cameras all over this city. We just need to find the right footage. And maybe there are other witnesses, people who aren't afraid to tell the truth." He stood up, and for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Anna felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance she could get through this. Michael walked to the door, knocking on it firmly to get the attention of the officers outside. After a moment, the door opened, and the officer from before, the one with the stern face, looked in, his eyes narrowing as he took in Michael's presence. "What's going on here?" the officer asked, his tone dripping with suspicion. Michael didn't flinch. He squared his shoulders, meeting the officer's gaze with a calm authority that seemed to catch the man off guard. "This woman is being detained without proper cause," Michael said. "I'm her legal representative, and I need to speak with whoever is in charge here." The officer's eyes flicked between Anna and Michael, a frown forming on his face. He seemed ready to argue, but something in Michael's stance and the confidence with which he spoke made him hesitate. Finally, he nodded curtly. "Wait here," he said, before stepping out and closing the door behind him. Michael turned back to Anna, his expression softening. "It's going to be okay," he said quietly. "They're not going to keep you here, not if I have anything to say about it." Anna took a deep breath, nodding. She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. She watched as Michael left the room, the door closing behind him with a soft click. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence in the room didn't feel quite as suffocating. Minutes felt like hours as Anna waited, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear muffled voices outside, the occasional raised tone, the sound of footsteps moving back and forth. She tried to focus on Michael's words, to hold on to the hope he had given her. She thought about her family, her mother, who had always told her to be strong no matter what. She thought about her younger sister, who looked up to her. Anna knew she couldn't give up now. She had to fight, not just for herself, but for them too. After what felt like an eternity, the door finally opened again, and Michael stepped inside. There was a small, triumphant smile on his face. "You're free to go, Anna," he said, "at least for now. They don't have enough to hold you, and I made sure they know we're not backing down." Anna's breath caught in her throat, and she felt tears welling in her eyes once more, tears of relief this time. She stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her, and Michael stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Easy now," he said. "We're not out of the woods yet, but this is a start." The officer from before stood in the doorway, his expression sour, but he stepped aside as Michael led Anna out of the room. The station was bustling, officers moving back and forth, papers being shuffled, phones ringing. Anna felt the eyes of some of the officers on her as they walked past, but she kept her gaze forward, focusing on the door ahead. The door that led to freedom. As they stepped outside, the cool night air hit Anna's face, and she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it in. It felt like she was taking her first real breath in hours. Michael stood beside her, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulder. "We'll take this one step at a time," he said. "I'm going to help you, Anna. We're going to prove your innocence." Anna looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. She didn't know why this man had decided to help her, but she was thankful he had. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, she felt like she wasn't alone. Michael led her to his car, a simple, older model sedan parked a little ways down the street. He opened the passenger door for her, and Anna got in, the seat soft beneath her, a stark contrast to the hard chair in the interrogation room. Michael got in on the driver's side and started the engine, the car rumbling to life. "Where are we going?" Anna asked, her voice still shaky. "First, I'm taking you somewhere safe," Michael said. "You need rest, and we need to plan our next steps. We're going to find the evidence we need, but you can't do that if you're exhausted." Anna nodded, leaning back against the seat. She was exhausted, more than she had even realized. The adrenaline that had kept her going was fading, leaving her feeling drained and fragile. She closed her eyes, the sound of the car's engine a comforting hum in the background. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to relax, if only just a little. As they drove through the quiet streets, Michael glanced over at her, his expression thoughtful. He had seen too many cases like this, too many people judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. He had walked away from his career as a lawyer years ago, disillusioned by the corruption and the prejudice that seemed to permeate the system. But seeing Anna, seeing the fear and hopelessness in her eyes, had stirred something in him. He couldn't just walk away, not this time. "We'll find the truth, Anna," he said quietly, more to himself than to her, "no matter what it takes." Anna didn't respond. She had already drifted off to sleep, her head resting against the window. Michael glanced at her again, a determined look in his eyes. He knew this was just the beginning, and the road ahead would be long and difficult. But he was ready to fight. For Anna. For justice. For the chance to make things right. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the small room where Anna had slept, casting a warm glow across her face. She stirred, slowly waking up, her body aching from the exhaustion of the day before. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was, the events of the previous night seeming like a distant nightmare. But as her eyes focused on the unfamiliar surroundings, the memories came rushing back. Being accused, arrested, the cold metal of the handcuffs, and then Michael. Michael had saved her, at least for now. Anna sat up on the small bed, glancing around the room. It was simple, but comfortable, with a small table, a chair, and a window that looked out onto the street below. She heard a knock on the door, and a moment later, it opened to reveal Michael, holding a cup of coffee in a paper bag. He gave her a small smile as he entered. "Mornin', Anna," he said, setting the cup and bag down on the table. "I thought you might be hungry. It's not much, but it'll get you started." Anna managed a smile in return, her gratitude evident in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. She took the coffee, the warmth of the cup comforting in her hands. She hadn't realized how much she needed something as simple as a warm drink until now. Michael sat down on the chair, watching her for a moment before speaking. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," he said, his tone serious. "I spent most of the night making some calls, trying to track down any footage from the area where the accident happened. I think I might have found something." Anna's eyes widened, and she set the cup down, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and fear. "Really? You found something that could help?" Michael nodded. "There's a camera on a building near the intersection where the accident happened. It's a long shot, but I've reached out to the owner of the building to see if we can get access to the footage. If we're lucky, it might show what really happened and prove you weren't involved." Anna took a deep breath, her chest tightening with a mix of emotions. The thought that there might be evidence to clear her name was almost too much to hope for. "Do you think they'll let us see it?" she asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. Michael smiled, a determined glint in his eyes. "I'm going to make sure they do. And I've got a friend who's a private investigator. He's good at finding things that other people miss. I've asked him to help too. We're going to get to the bottom of this, Anna. I promise you that." Anna nodded, feeling a surge of hope that she hadn't felt in a long time. She trusted Michael, and she could see that he truly believed in her innocence. It was strange, having someone on her side after feeling so alone for so long. She took a sip of the coffee, the warmth spreading through her, and looked at Michael with gratitude. "I don't know why you're doing all this for me, but thank you," she said quietly. Michael shook his head. "You don't need to thank me, Anna. I've seen too many people get crushed by this system because no one was willing to fight for them. You deserve a chance, just like anyone else. And I'm not going to let them take that from you." Anna felt tears welling in her eyes, but she blinked them back, nodding. She had to stay strong, for herself and for Michael. He was risking so much to help her, and she couldn't let his efforts be in vain. Later that day, Michael and Anna drove to the building near the intersection where the accident had taken place. It was an old brick building with a small convenience store on the ground floor. Michael parked the car and they both got out, Anna feeling a mix of nerves and hope as they approached the entrance. Michael had already spoken to the owner and he was hopeful that they could get access to the footage. The store owner, a middle-aged man with a kind face, greeted them as they entered. "You must be Michael," he said, extending his hand. "I got your call. I'm glad to help if I can." Michael shook his hand, smiling. "Thank you, Mr. Patel. This means a lot to us." He glanced at Anna, who gave the man a small, grateful smile. Mr. Patel led them to a back room where the security monitors were set up. He gestured to a screen that showed a grainy image of the street outside. "The camera's not the best quality, but it's been working," he said. He began rewinding the footage, and Anna watched, her heart pounding as the images flickered by. She could see herself running towards the scene, kneeling by the injured man, but that wasn't what they needed. They needed proof that she hadn't been driving the car. Michael leaned in, his eyes focused on the screen. "There," he said suddenly, pointing. Anna's breath caught as she saw a car speeding down the street moments before the accident. It was a dark sedan, the license plate barely visible in the dim light, but it was enough. The footage showed the car striking the man, and then speeding away, long before Anna had even arrived at the scene. "That's it," Michael said, his voice filled with determination. "This is what we need." He turned to Mr. Patel. "Can we get a copy of this footage? It could prove that Anna had nothing to do with this." Mr. Patel nodded, already working on transferring the footage to a USB drive. "Of course. I'm just glad I could help." Anna felt a rush of relief, her knees almost giving out beneath her. Michael reached out, steadying her, and she looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. This could change everything," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Michael nodded, a small smile on his lips. "We're not done yet, Anna, but this is a start. We're going to make sure they can't ignore the truth." With the footage in hand, Michael and Anna drove back to his office. It was a small space, cluttered with papers and files, but it felt safe, a place where they could plan their next move. Michael plugged the USB drive into his laptop, the footage playing on the screen. He watched it again, his eyes narrowing as he took in every detail. "We need to find out who owns that car," he said, his voice filled with determination. "If we can track them down, we can prove that they were the ones responsible, and clear your name once and for all." Anna nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. It was overwhelming, thinking about everything that still needed to be done, but she knew she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when they were finally making progress. Michael picked up his phone, dialing a number and waiting for the line to connect. "Hey, it's Michael," he said when the person on the other end answered. "I need a favor. I've got a license plate number and I need to know who it belongs to. It's important." He paused, listening, then nodded. "Thanks, I owe you one." He hung up, turning to Anna. "My friend's going to look into it. It might take some time, but we'll get the information we need." Anna took a deep breath, nodding. She looked at Michael, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and determination. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said quietly. "I was ready to give up." Michael shook his head. "You're stronger than you think, Anna, and we're going to see this through, together." Days passed as they waited for information, each one feeling like an eternity. Anna stayed with Michael, the two of them working tirelessly to gather any evidence they could. Michael's private investigator friend managed to track down the owner of the car, a man with a history of reckless driving and a string of unpaid fines. It was the break they had been waiting for. With the new information, Michael prepared to present their findings to the police. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Getting them to admit they were wrong was going to be a battle. But he was ready for it. He had seen too many injustices go unchallenged, and he wasn't about to let that happen to Anna. The day they went to the police station, Anna's heart was pounding in her chest. She felt a mix of fear and hope, her hands trembling as she clutched the folder containing all the evidence they had gathered. Michael walked beside her, his presence a steadying force. They were led into a small office where a senior officer sat behind a desk, his expression guarded as he looked at them. Michael wasted no time, setting the folder down on the desk and opening it, showing the footage and the documents they had gathered. "This is proof that Anna had nothing to do with the accident," Michael said, his voice steady but firm. "The real culprit is out there, and it's your job to bring him to justice." The officer looked at the evidence, his brow furrowing as he watched the footage. Anna held her breath, her heart pounding as she waited for his response. There was a long moment of silence, and then the officer looked up at her, his expression softening. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "It looks like we made a mistake." Anna felt a wave of relief wash over her, tears welling in her eyes. Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his own expression filled with a mix of triumph and determination. "It's not just about clearing Anna's name," he said. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. People deserve to be treated fairly, regardless of who they are." The officer nodded, a look of regret in his eyes. "We'll reopen the case and make sure the right person is held accountable," he said. "And again, I'm truly sorry for what you've been through." As they left the station, Anna felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The sun was shining, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely. She looked at Michael, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know how I could ever repay you." Michael smiled, shaking his head. "You don't need to repay me, Anna. Just live your life. Be happy. That's all the thanks I need." Anna nodded, a smile spreading across her face. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time she felt like she had a future, one that was hers to shape. And she knew she wasn't alone. With Michael by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they walked away from the station, the sun shining down on them, a symbol of the new beginning that awaited. Anna knew that this was just the start, but she was ready to fight, ready to live, and ready to take back the life that had almost been stolen from her. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new episodes. Also, be sure to check out our other videos. There's more to come.